Hello friends, what is up? How you doing? My name is Riley Holbert and I just came back from the Dallas Regional Championship where I finished first place out of 1,052 Pokemon Trading Card Game Masters, and I'm so stoked to share with you today my Zoroark GX Muk deck and give you a little bit of insight into the card choices I made and why I played this deck and some of the matchups I felt like I had going into this tournament. So, to start off the deck, we're going to start with the Pokemon. We play for Zoroark. This is the Zoroark from Dark Explorers that has the Paralyzing Gaze attack. Paralyzing Gaze is overall the best Zoroark. Gives you a lot of niche situations that you might not even think about. So, for example, if you have a Zoroark with a DCE on it, because we only play DCE in this deck, and you use Paralyzing Gaze, and you flip a heads to paralyze your opponent, if they don't play a switch, or now an escape board maybe, or an escape rope, they're going to have to Guzma out of the active. And what's cool about that is that your Zoroark with a DCE will no longer be their active Pokemon unless they use a Pokemon catcher. So this can really save you sometimes. This can keep a DCE on the board. Even just stalling with Paralyzation for a turn can just be so huge. You don't always have the Guzma to get out of it. And so overall, this is the best Zoroark. I only use Paralyzing Gaze once this entire tournament, but it's pretty important to keep in mind if you're really chasing that first place finish that you want to be as optimal as you can in every aspect. Ram Zoroark is also, I think, an acceptable alternative, doing 30 damage on a coin flip. You can knock out a Joltik or a Pumpkaboo with that, but it doesn't really offer you much outside of Night March. Paralyzing Gaze will pretty much always be useful, at least in some capacity. Next up, we play full 4 Zoroark GX. Zoroark GX is just too good not to play 4 of, in my opinion. The trade ability is just absolutely broken, especially with the Execute card that we're going to show off in a minute here. Being able to discard a card from your hand and draw 2 cards is incredibly powerful, especially with that Execute. You're going to be able to draw, 6 to 8 cards per turn in addition to your draw and your supporter, and that's just absolutely broken. It makes supporters that aren't draw supporters so much more powerful because now you're drawing a draw supporter's worth of cards per turn, and you're going to be able to play another supporter. Zoroark just makes your deck a lot more flexible and a lot more powerful. And let's not forget the Riotous Beating attack. Zoroark is actually pretty much the only attacker that we run in this deck, and Riotous Beating is absolutely incredible, especially in Expanded. I would muse with my friends before Zoroark actually came out that this is pretty much an Expanded only card. I was proven wrong clearly by its success in London and in Memphis. However, Riotous Beating just becomes so much better with a Skyfield in play. You can now do 180 damage with 9 Pokemon in play, including the active. And you can do 210 with a Choice Band, and that is just absolutely insane. Not a lot of decks can really respond to a turn 2 Riotous Beating for 210 damage. Next up, we run one other Zoroark. We run the Foul Play Zoroark, not the Mind Jack Zoroark. I've been asked about the Mind Jack Zoroark, and I actually don't really like the Mind Jack Zoroark too much. It is very good in the mirror. You can Mind Jack for a ton of damage because they have to fill their bench naturally with a Zoroark deck. However, what I typically found is that I can fill my own bench and respond with a knockout, even Foul Play for a Riotous Beating, or even Foul Play for a Mind Jack if they play Mind Jack themselves. And what's cool about Foul Play is it offers you a lot of niche matchups that you might not have even thought about. For example, the Buzzwole decks out there, they're very weak to a Foul Play for a Knuckle Impact or Foul Play for an Absorption GX. This deck actually does not run in a way to use a GX attack, so Foul Play for a GX attack is just incredibly strong. Additionally, this Zoroark just has a lot of niche use. For example, you can Foul Play your opponent's Junk Hunt. That's really cool. You can Foul Play your opponent's Trashalanche, which is really strong. Overall, this Foul Play gives you a lot of additional options that I think Mind Jack doesn't really offer you. The one addition that I really do like about Mind Jack is the stand-in ability. It gives you a little more access to getting out of status conditions, such as against Seismitoad decks or against a Shocklock deck. But in the end, I don't think it's super necessary. And without Floatstone on it, that's not really that strong of a play anyway. And the only way you're going to really hit that Floatstone is if you run multiple of them. And I only run the one Floatstone in this deck, so that stand-in combo becomes a little less powerful. Next up, we have 2 Execute. This is really the juice that makes this deck flow. Propagation is such an incredibly strong ability, being able to constantly recycle Executes into your hand. Especially with Trade and Ultra Ball and Computer Search, Propagation just becomes so busted because now you're using all of these things that are supposed to have costs associated with them for free. So, however, what's important to keep in mind is you don't always want to propagate and trade just because you can. There are lots of times where I might opt out of propagating just so I can trade a card that I don't want in my deck. And so if I get end later in the game, I don't draw that card from my deck because it's now in the discard pile thanks to trade. Zoroark is a deck thinner as much as he is a draw engine. Next up, we have Sudowoodo. Sudowoodo is really good for the roadblock ability. It prevents your opponent from having more than 4 benched Pokemon in play, and they have to discard down even if they have more than 4. Sudowoodo is really good, especially against Zoroark decks. However, it's also just kind of good in general because you play Skyfield, so if your opponent wants to take advantage of their Skyfield, they're going to have to deactivate your Sudowoodo somehow. Otherwise, they're going to be limited to 4 bench Pokemon themselves. We do play a Muk, which negates our own Sudowoodo. However, it's still useful in the early game against Zoroark decks before you get your Muk online. And it's just kind of generally useful. For example, against an Archie's deck, now all of a sudden they have to keep their bench very limited. Otherwise, they can't pull off the Archie's maneuver. Same thing for Maxie's type decks. Overall, just sometimes your opponent needs more than 4 bench spots. They need that full 5 to get their setup properly. And Sudowoodo can get in the way there. Next up, we have Alolan Grimer. This is the dark type one. Unfortunately, it has a fighting type weakness alongside Zoroark, so it gets hit for the same weakness, which decks targeting Zoroark will naturally have that. And so, why are we playing the dark one, especially if we're only playing one? I chose it because I like the slippery sludge attack, actually. Your opponent's active Pokemon is now confused, and for a double colorless energy, it fits right into the deck. This is kind of a niche thing. I never actually use this in tournament. But having a psychic one at the same time never would have been relevant to me based on my tournament run. But sometimes your opponent will be confused and they will make suboptimal plays because they don't know what to do under confusion, or they just don't want to put it on a coin flip. And to be fair, I totally understand that kind of mentality. I have actually never flipped heads on a confusion coin flip in a premier event. I've done it online, but never in real life. And so I totally get it. Confusion is very frustrating, and it can force you into some awkward situations. And plus, if you actually get the tails on the confusion there, your opponent could be in a very rough position. Grimer, unfortunately, has 3 retreat. The other Grimer, I believe, has 2 retreat, which is a little bit better in that way. And it has the Super Poison Breath for free, which can apply poison on a coin flip. But overall, I just like this Grimer. Plus, I think he looks a little bit cooler, so that's always a factor to keep in mind, I suppose. Unfortunately, there only is the one Alolan Muk, but this one does look pretty cool in of itself, and it's kind of cool that it changes type. So Power of Alchemy is a really strong ability, however. Each player's basic Pokemon in their hand, in play, and their discard pile have no abilities, so this turns off mostly Sudowoodo. Your opponents are probably going to be playing Sudowoodo against you because you're playing a Zoroark deck, and they don't want you to just fill your bench and destroy them. So the way they circumvent that is with the Sudowoodo usually. However, what happens is that you can play the Muk down, turn off the Sudowoodo, fill your bench, and just go in with your Riotous Beating attack. What's cool about Muk as well is it has a lot of incidental use cases against decks that are reliant on basic Pokemon abilities. So, for example, Turbo Darkrai decks. Those were very common online, and I think they actually weren't that uncommon at the tournament. Just none of them ended up making day 2. My friend Andrew Wamble was playing a Turbo Darkrai deck, however, and Muk is really good against those kind of decks. Same thing with Turbo Turtles, because they can turn off the basic Pokemon abilities that those decks really flow with. So it gives the deck a little bit of control that isn't available normally. Additionally, it's also good against Keldeo, turning off that Russian ability. It's good against opposing Executes, because now they're not going to be able to propagate out of the discard pile, which sometimes can prevent your opponent from really responding with a full bench, because now they don't have access to their eggs. Next up, we have Seismitoad EX, another control-esque card. The Quaking Punch attack. Really good for 30 damage and just a double colorless energy. You can prevent your opponent from using item cards during their next turn. Seismitoad is really good for just a couple turns here and there where you might want to prevent your opponent from using items. I only declared Quaking Punch a handful of times throughout the tournament. However, I'd say every time that I did, it was especially important for my game plan, and I would not cut Seismitoad from this deck, even though it's primarily there for the combination with Karen against Night March. Next up, we have 3 Tapu Lele GX. Tapu Lele is just one of the best cards Pokemon has ever printed in the game. Wonder Tag is absolutely insane. Benching Tapu Lele GX allows you to search for any supporter. Energy Drive, also insane. Reminiscent of the Mewtwo of days past, doing 20 damage times the number of energy on both active Pokemon. Great alternative attacker against Seismitoad, but also really good against Zoroark decks. If you're both under Sudowoodo and just playing the 2-shot game, what you can do is you can hit with an energy drive for 80 damage, and then your opponent's Zoroark GX is perfectly set up if they don't play an Acerola to knock out with your own Zoroark GX, because you'll do 100 damage under Sudowoodo with a full bench, and you'll do 130 with a Choice Band. Add the 80 from Lele, and now all of a sudden you're doing 210 damage exactly. Perfect to knock out a Zoroark. And what's cool about doing that play is you might retreat the Lele, so you have a damaged Lele, but you have a full HP Zoroark that now has taken a knockout on their Zoroark. Next up, we have 2 Shaman EX, and this will actually round out the Pokemon lineup. Shaman EX with the setup ability is really great to draw additional cards from your deck even without using trade. If you have a thin hand, you can Ultra Ball for a Shaman, especially good after an N, or maybe right after a Bridget. Shaman is just a really strong card. Sky Return also a decent attack, 30 damage, and return Shaman to your hand. This is great to conserve your DCEs if you're not taking a one-hit knockout. So that way you don't have to have maybe your Zoroark or Seismitoad or Tapu Lele knocked out and just lose a DCE for essentially not a knockout. You can just set up a knockout for later and put the DCE back in your hand. So that'll wrap up the Pokemon lineup. I think this is a really solid lineup. Perhaps 2 Grimer or 3 Egg would be necessary. I joked around with my friends that I would play 4 Egg before I would just play 1. But I think this lineup was very good for the tournament, and I don't think I would change a single thing. Next up, for the supporters, we play 2 copies of Bridget. Bridget is essential for this deck for getting multiple Zoruas in play. You need multiple Zoroarks as play as soon as possible, so getting up to 3 Zorua turn 1. You'll typically not get 3 Zorua, but 3 Zorua is an option. And that's really great for setting up later. Just adds a lightning element to your deck. Additionally, you can use Bridget in the mid to late game. Say, you just need to fill up your bench, you have a Skyfield in play, you can just play Bridget and grab 3 more basic Pokemon onto your bench immediately. Next up, we have 2 copies of Colress. Colress is the ideal draw supporter in this deck because we love shuffle draw, we don't really want to discard anything, and we have a naturally full bench anyway. And what's cool about expanded format right now is a lot of decks are playing Bridget, even the non-Zoroark decks. So what typically will happen is you might have Sudowoodo in play, your opponent might have Sudowoodo in play, and you guys will have 4 Pokemon because of Tapu Lele for Bridget. And so turn 2, you can usually Colress for 8 cards immediately. And that's insane. That's an insane turn 2 draw supporter. Insane in the late game when you have Skyfield, you can Colress for like 12 to 16 cards regularly. I never pulled off the legendary Colress for 16, but I have gotten 12, 13 in most of my matches in the tournament. Next up, we play N. This is our only other straight up draw supporter. Shuffle each player's hand in their deck and then draw for their respective prize cards. And it's pretty good, it's great for disruption. It's not really the ideal draw supporter, but it's great if, turn 1 or 2, your opponent didn't fill their bench that much. You can use N instead of Colress to draw a couple more cards. You can use it late game to disrupt your opponent and then trade until, you have a healthy hand size and they have a low hand size. Overall, N's really powerful and I wouldn't give it up, although I didn't play it that many times throughout the tournament. Next up, we have Getsis. This is also technically a draw supporter, but it's more for the disruption than the draw. Getsis lets you take a peek at your opponent's hand, and you can shuffle any item cards you find there into the deck and draw a card for each item that's shuffled in. And so, what's cool about Getsis is you can really take away your opponent's options in the mid to late game. Turn 1 Getsis, I know it receives a lot of flack for being too oppressive. I actually only went for turn 1 Getsis once or twice in the entire tournament, because I think sometimes you can just be really punished hard if you go for a turn 1 Getsis and your opponent has a way out of it immediately, such as with the Professor Sycamore or having a Bridget in hand or anything like that. Even then, if you play Getsis, your opponent can top deck out of it, which happened to me in my stream match against RG's Blastoise. So Getsis, I think, is actually best in the mid to late game. Say your opponent needs a VS Seeker, you look at their discard pile, all of their Guzmas are in there, to your knowledge. You can Getsis their hand, and they can shuffle in those VS Seekers, and now it's up to them to basically top deck the VS Seeker for game. Getsis is especially good in combination with Zoroark GX because I always say you shouldn't play Getsis if you can't afford not to draw this turn. But with Zoroark GX, you are drawing additional cards in addition to the Getsis every single turn. So that's incredibly powerful. I would not play this deck without Getsis in it, especially when you can Seismitoad EX for a couple turns and force your opponent to fill their hand with items. Next up, we have Acerola. Acerola is one of my favorite supporter cards. Colress is probably my favorite supporter card right now in expanded format, but Acerola is up there too. Just being able to pick up a Pokemon just like AZ, with the stipulation that they must have damage on it, but with the added benefit now that you can keep all cards attached to this Pokemon. So it's really great for conserving double colorless energy while also healing damage off of your board. Basically, damage won't stick on a board with Zoroark. So, you have to be one hit knocking them out, which just puts so much pressure on your opponents that wasn't there previously. Acerola is just an amazing card, and again, I would not play this deck without Acerola. Hexmaniac is absolute juice in this deck. It is such a powerful supporter at almost all stages of the game. Almost every deck is reliant on abilities to some degree, except for Garbodor decks. So if you trade up with Zoroark, draw a bunch of cards, and then Hexmaniac, that is just so oppressive. Hex is probably the best supporter a lot of turns for this deck, as long as you're able to continue playing cards such as DCE, Choice Bands. If you're hitting everything you need, Hex is a great default supporter, alongside Getsis. The disruption that those supporters provide really can't be underestimated. Next up, we play a Karen. This is almost entirely for the Night March matchup, especially in conjunction with Seismitoad EX. Being able to shuffle their Night Marches back into the deck. However, Karen also has the effect of shuffling in your own Pokemon, and so it can be used against mill decks to get you a couple extra turns by shuffling in a ton of Pokemon. Additionally, if you just had your Skyfield bumped a couple times, you can Karen to get your Pokemon back. I only played Karen this tournament when I was against Night March. However, I had a funny moment where I was playing against Archie's Blastoise, and they used all of their compressors and didn't have a Blastoise house on the field. And I was going to Karen them if they didn't get this Archie's the next turn, but they were able to pull it off, so I couldn't get the Karen play going. However, that could have been a really fun opportunity because my opponent now has no battle compressors and they can't put Blastoise easily back in the discard pile. Next up, we have Pokemon Ranger. This originally was put in the deck because I was afraid of people being really petty and just playing stuff like Mismagius and Giratina. And if they got a Chaos Wheel off with an Enhanced Hammer, they would basically win against Zoroark decks. And that to me was really troublesome, so I put a Pokemon Ranger in. Also ended up being really good against Seismitoad, against Glycopod. It ended up actually being a really good card. I didn't even think about this when I initially tucked it in, but being able to Pokemon Ranger and Armor Press is just so insane. A lot of times the Glycopod decks are trying to really force this 2-hit KO war because they are a better 2-hit KO deck than the Zoroark Muk deck is because they play multiple Acerola. But with Pokemon Ranger, you can really screw with their game plan there and get a little bit of a leg up in that matchup. I actually only lost one game to Glycopod Zoroark all weekend, and that was because I started a Lone Shaman, which got knocked out on the second turn of the game. And finally, to wrap up the supporters, we have Guzma. A Gust Effect is pretty much necessary when it's an option in Pokemon. Just being able to pull up your opponent's Pokemon, such as their Sudowoodo, or a Tapu Lele for game, or a Shaman for game, or even a Zoroark GX on the bench that you just want to knock out. It's just absolutely insane. Guzma, one of the best supporters in the game right now. Unfortunately, not full art like the rest of my supporters. I like my one-of supporters to typically be full art so I can find them easier in the deck. But Guzma is still a really cool guy. It's my boy for sure. Definitely cannot play this deck without a Guzma. Lysander also an option, but I think Guzma gives you a little bit of extra oomph because you can switch out your Pokemon such as your Muk or your Seismitoad, which have a little bit of a heavier retreat cost. Shout out to my friend Jimmy for providing some of these full art supporters, such as the Colress and the Getsis. And the Acerola as well, because I really do, like I said, like my supporters to be full art because it lets them be really easily found in the deck. The supporters have just such distinct coloring to them. It makes my deck searches a little bit quicker, and so I really appreciate that from my friend Jimmy. So we're going to move on to the items next. We're going to have 4 VS Seeker. Some Zoroark decks have cut down to less VS Seekers, especially with Puzzle of Time, allowing you to access your discard pile. But we play so many one-of supporters in this deck that VS Seeker just has a lot of extra power, especially when in conjunction with Battle Compressor. So VS Seeker allows us to play basically 5 Hex in a game, discounting Puzzle of Time. It allows us to play 5-6 Colress, allows us to play 5 Getsis, 5 N. Really powerful card in of itself. Makes all of our supporters basically have more count to them. And next up, we have 4 Ultra Ball. Ultra Ball doesn't really need any explaining, just the best Pokemon search in the game, especially in conjunction with Shaman EX. Being able to draw more cards, and in conjunction with Execute, basically making Ultra Ball free as long as you have Execute in the discard pile. Ultra Ball, can't play without it, it's just part of the game right now. We have 4 Puzzle of Time, one of the best cards in the game at the moment, especially in conjunction with Zoroark. We can really easily hit these Puzzle of Times and get some really cool plays going. Being able to access cards in your discard pile that maybe you wouldn't normally be able to access. Just really adds a layer of oomph to this deck that wasn't there without Puzzle of Time. We play 2 Battle Compressor. Battle Compressor, really good for getting Execute in the discard pile, really good for getting supporters in the discard pile, so you can use VS Seeker to use them. Also, you can use Battle Compressor to essentially put anything in the discard pile in conjunction with Puzzle of Time. And the reason that is you can use Puzzle of Time to grab the card, you Battle Compressor it away, and now all of a sudden, you're Battle Compressoring Choice Bands, and your opponent's like, well, what are you doing? Oh no, you're going to Puzzle of Time. And you Puzzle of Time the Choice Band back, and now you're rolling. Speaking of Choice Band, we play 2 of the bad boys. We only play 3 tools in the deck, 2 Choice Band and a Floatstone. Choice Band, really powerful though for putting your damage over at 210. 3 Choice Band is an option in some Zoroark decks, but I think especially with Puzzle of Time, that 2 is sufficient. I never really had any trouble drawing into the Choice Band. Next up, we play 1 Rescue Stretcher. This just gets us Pokemon out of the deck. Additionally, you can refill your decks with Pokemon so you don't deck out. Or sorry, Pokemon out of the discard pile, not the deck. So this is really good for grabbing a Zoroark GX, maybe to evolve Zorua. You can also Battle Compressor a Pokemon and Rescue Stretcher it to your hand. I call that the backdoor maneuver. I did that a couple times with Zoroark GX. Overall, Rescue Stretcher is really strong. Allows you to refill your bench if you get something bumped. And just really powerful card. I wouldn't want to play this deck without it. We play 1 Special Charge, refill your deck with Special Energy. We only play double colorless energy in this deck, and there's a lot of energy hate in the format. So Special Charge, really good. Just being able to continually use those energy with a little more recklessness, because you can always Special Charge them back. Also really good against the Garbodor deck that I played in top 8 and in round 7 of day 1, because now all of a sudden, you're getting energy denied, but you can just put them back in the deck and not really have to worry about puzzling for them, which is a lot harder of a maneuver, especially on a Garbotoxin. We play 1 Floatstone. Originally there was 2 Floatstone, but I found 1 to be sufficient. We're really just trying to use it, once or twice a game to switch out our Pokemon. And especially with access to, Zoroark GX, Battle Compressor, Puzzle of Time, we're going to be hitting our Floatstone as long as it's in the deck. Prizing it was never an issue for me. Sometimes it was prized, even in the very last prize card slot, but it never ended up impacting my game plan because you can always switch with Guzma. We play 1 Field Blower. This is mostly for Garbodor decks, also really good against, fighting Fury Belts, or if you're struggling a little bit, you can Field Blower your own Skyfield or Field Blower Parallel City. This is a really strong card. You really can't afford to play a deck without it. That's really just too greedy. Field Blower, absolutely essential to making this deck function against Garbodor decks, which I was afraid were still going to be a thing, because I think Garbodor is a lot stronger than people gave it credit for going into this tournament. We played 1 out of Red Card. This card had a lot of people talking over the weekend. My deck was called a Zoroark Red Card deck for a little bit there. Red Card is just really strong for the added level of disruption that this deck provides. And so what I typically found is that against opposing Zoroark decks, at some point you are going to be playing Sudowoodo War and just kind of ace rolling, and there will be a point in time where you can just play Hex Maniac, fill your board, and go get a big knockout on a clean Zoroark. And so my biggest problem with that was typically what would happen is my opponent also had a very large hand size because they had been trading ace rolling for a couple turns, and they can respond to my knockout with a knockout of their own. I didn't like that. I wanted to have more control over the game state. And so I played a red card, so that way I can red card and Hex Maniac in the same turn, completely oppressing a Zoroark deck. And what's cool about red card is even if they draw out of it, typically they can't afford to play an end in the same turn. So if I take a big knockout and red card in the same turn, they have a low hand size. They're typically going to have to play a different draw supporter, such as Juniper, Sycamore, or Colress. And so that keeps my hand a little more secure, as well as disrupting their own. Red card was absolutely essential in almost every single series I played this weekend. It was essential in all of my top 8 matches. I would not play this deck without a red card. It was something I came up kind of on a whim just a couple of weeks before the tournament, and my friends, were obliging me. They're like, this is crazy, this is stupid, but, it sounds kind of good. And by the time we had tested it, we determined this is one of the most broken cards in the deck. Absolutely essential to making it function. Zoroark just makes it work so much better. And what's cool is with our A-Spec computer search, you can search that red card out so easily. You can computer search for the red card, you can red card, you can Battle Compressor the red card, you can Puzzle of Time for it back. And, it's just, there's so much flexibility with it. But computer search, discard 2 cards, possibly executes. Search for any card in your deck. It's just absolutely insane. You can also play Dowsing Machine justifiably in this deck, but I think computer search, that level of consistency that provides, cannot be understated. And so there are a lot of cool plays you can make with computer search. There was one game and stream in the finals where I computer search for a Puzzle of Time, use Puzzle of Time for a Battle Compressor and another computer search for a red card, Battle Compressor to Hex Maniac away, VS Seeker for Hex, and now all of a sudden I got, out of nowhere, I had a red card, Hex Maniac. Computer search, especially with Puzzle of Time, just really strong card. You can use it multiple times in a game. Puzzle of Time I've allowed me to use computer search or red card up to 3 times in a game each, and that's just absolutely bonkers. Next up, we play 3 stadiums in this deck, 3 Skyfield. Originally, there was 4 Skyfield in this deck, but I found that was overkill. I was just drawing Skyfields all the time. I didn't really need them. And so I cut the 4 Skyfield for the Pokemon Ranger, which ended up being more useful in the long run, I think. 4 Skyfield is a consideration. I would not go down to 2, that's for sure. I think 3 is the sweet spot for sure. But 4 is justifiable. I think 3 is just right where it needs to be, though. I never had any trouble hitting a stadium when I needed to. Especially against other Zoroark decks when they're also going to be playing Skyfield for you. And lastly, we play 4 double colorless energy in this deck. Our only energy, very weak to special energy denial sometimes. However, with Pokemon Ranger and Trade, I never really had any trouble like removing those kind of effects or just getting a DCE to play into. Sometimes I'd have games where I have 2 DCE prizes and I would draw them both at once from the prizes, and that would just be such a relief. But, overall, I didn't really have any trouble hitting them. You can Puzzle of Time for them back. You can Special Charge them back. You can conserve them with Shaman EX and Acerola. Just really not much of a problem, and typically you can end the game in like 3 to 4 attacks anyway. So this is the deck list. This is how it looks. This is how it feels. I wouldn't change anything from my Dallas list if I was to play an expanded event right now. I just think this deck is so strong in of itself. The one of items are so powerful, especially the red card. You can't play this deck without a red card, I don't think. There are many times where I have a Cold Rest and red card in the same turn, and that's really impressive. For example, against Brad Curcio in round 8, one turn I just could not hit an N for his big wheel. So I Cold Rest, drew a bunch of cards, and I hit the red card, and red card is his big wheel, which actually ended up being stronger than an N because he had 6 prizes left. So yeah, this is how the deck's looking right now. Fairly confident in almost every matchup. I'll go over some of them just right now. Other Zoroark variants, we're overall favored, especially if they don't play a red card, because we're going to very consistently get multiple Zoroark out in a game just by playing this strict Zoroark line instead of relying on other Pokemon like Golisopod or Lycanroc. And we can use the red card Hex to just disrupt them in the mid game and then go just absolutely in from there and just totally wreck their game state. So I feel like almost all Zoroark decks are favored. The Zoroark Execute deck that I played in the finals actually is also pretty strong against Zoroark decks. But I think our version is just a little more consistent as far as getting our game plan rolling. Fighting decks that are made to counter Zoroark are a little bit rough sometimes, but getting the Grimer and the Muk out are just so essential because you can turn off their Sudowoodo and get big one-shots and just trade one-shots on their fighting Pokemon. And the problem with fighting Pokemon is they take multiple attachments to knock out, and we just take one. And so I actually don't think the matchup's too bad there. The biggest decks that might give you problems are the mill decks, like the Wailord decks. And our big power play there is to use a red card and to Getsus. And so that will disrupt their hand, put them in a low hand size. And if they only have one Wailord in play, they can't AZ or Acerola it without another basic Pokemon. So red card just gives you a little bit of flexibility there. Same thing with Shock Lock. I played against Shock Lock in round 10. That should be an auto loss, but red card forced them to miss a turn of the lock, and I played red card multiple times with Puzzle of Time that game. And so red card just really improves a lot of matchups, such as those mill decks. Additionally, Garbodor decks are a little bit hard, but the Field Blower, as long as you hit it, just can let you go off and just take complete control of the game. Red card really good for if they try to big wheel with Drampa. Overall, this deck's just really solid, I think, in a lot of matchups. I can't really think of anything that it just straight loses to. Even those silly decks like Noivern and Garbodor, you can pull those out of your butt sometimes, Pokemon Ranger. So yeah, I would recommend this deck to anyone expanded right now. I think it's the best deck that's out there. I think this list is pretty much as good as it gets. Shout out to my friend Andrew Dankus, who also got top 16 with this deck. We went a combined 25, 5, and 3 with this deck. That is an absolutely crazy record for the two of us. Winning the whole event and getting top 16. If you have any questions about this deck, feel free to message me on Facebook or post in the comments section and let me know what you think about Zoroark decks. I'd love to hear your thoughts, what kind of Zoroark decks you like in Expanded, or if you think Zoroark's even a problem that maybe should be banned from Expanded. I don't think necessarily this is a problem, but but I know it is very centralizing. I don't necessarily think, though, that centralizing means that it's a bad thing. Anyway, I look forward to hearing from you guys, and look forward to more videos from me with my own decks and deck profiles and tournament reports in the future. Thanks, everyone. See you later.